so painfully laborious in the modern world, unlike the early church. It's just painful and complicated. So, like if you ask a Vatican bureaucrat, they'd say, oh no, 10,000 pages and all the money, it's necessary. You ask a parish priest, they will all say, no, it creates a lot of harm. It depends if, does that make any sense? The annulment process, it's painful. But a Vatican bureaucrat is so removed from actually doing annulments that they don't want to change it. So I don't want to talk about annulments. In the pains of people. Like, they're going through the annulment process. It's, a few times I've met people who said, oh no, it was very healing, and that was its object. But for most people, you're always going to get tears, and I didn't think of this. Like, if somebody's like a really good Catholic, just last week, very devout Catholic, said, I didn't think it'd be this painful. Like, it's so hard. Said, I really, and she was honest that she was really angry with the Catholic Church. Why do you have to make it so bureaucratically hard? Does that make sense? That's a perspective from a parish priest. But as Albert Speer says, when you have the devil's hand on your shoulder, that you're buddy-buddy, you don't feel the pain that you're causing other people. And so wrestling with the issue of evil, there's no one answer. But there's different ways of looking at it and different ways of looking at types of evil. And my overall goal is not only to recognize evil, but to make us good. So in this backwards way, studying evil is studying goodness. And so there's many multiple... Is there a problem, Teresa? You look... Oh. No, I didn't. Oh. But there's many answers to evil, such as, not in this class, evil as a way of maturing us. That's St. Irenaeus' view, which I have to admit, I was shocked as I thought it was profound. Is evil transcendent or very mundane? Or both? We'd say both. In this class, I'm going to cover the mundane. So I want to introduce you to a range of thoughts over the centuries about answers to evil and suffering, rather than one simple answer. And the Polish poet Herbert, he said, my teachers tried to teach him about evil, but only experiences really teach you. But he said his teachers gave him a language to later understand what he was going through. So in this class, I want to talk about how mundane evil is, and I want to talk about the Genesis. That in Genesis, evil is seen as a rebellion against God, against goodness. So why evil exists? And the odd part is the earliest literature of human beings, whether it's Genesis or the Numa Elish, this ancient story we'll get into later, it grapples with the question of evil. And those literatures are 4,000 years old. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? And even the ancient epic, Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, to 9/11, to the Ukrainian invasion, it's a problem of theodicy, which is a big fancy word which means the existence of evil. How do we understand that? And so, oddly, the Christian religion is probably more obsessed about the idea of evil because it concerns goodness. So these lectures will examine the history and the cultural definitions of evil and solutions, devising how we live in its shadow. No one answer covers it all. So it's a multitude of ways of looking at solutions. So in the book of Genesis, evil is seen as the opposite of freedom, which I love. Evil is this rebellion against life, both horizontal and vertically. Evil is a form of rebellion against the singular goodness of creation and God. So the story of evil combines human ambition to rival God and be independent from God, to be like God, not one who is with God. So God is pictured as a guard against evil, and oddly designs us where we need to face up to evil to gain freedom. The fact that the Genesis story of the snake is in the garden is about us needing to face up to evil, not give in to it. So I have to admit, it always seems strange to me as a kid. If the Garden of Eden is paradise, what is a snake doing in it? But that's the point. If we're truly one with God, evil can't hurt us. We've got to be able to face the snake. Not, like I always tell parents, your job as a parent is not to keep your kid safe, it's to keep your kid strong. If you wall off your kid completely from all the evils in the world, you're not preparing them for the world. They've got to be stronger than the evils in the world. Does that make sense? So that's the point of it. And so you have these ancient Genesis stories they're amazing. Because think about this. They're 3,000 years old. But civilization only started 2,000 years before that. So these stories that are being written down, first in oral history, they already lived them for 2,000 years. So we're as close to the beginning of civilization, they were as close to the beginning of civilization as we are to the Roman Empire. So they're really quite ancient stories. The story of Adam and Eve is this recounting of creation, but it's the opposite of the pagan myths. In Genesis, the world is wholly good. Human beings are good. And we're governed by a good God. So for the ancient Israelites, Adam and Eve did not create evil out of nothing. As Christians believe, God created the cosmos, and it was we human beings who first actualized the potential of evil. Before that, it was just goodness. So the Genesis account still suggests that evil and temptation were potentials in the present world due to this odd creature, human beings, that were given free will. Now, in the Genesis story, this may shock you. There's no mention of Satan. And that's a key point. There's a mention of the snake, and later, under St. Paul, we'll learn that the snake is Satan. But, and that's part of wisdom literature as well. But you have to ask yourself, well, why didn't they just say Satan? Why a snake? And this sounds kind of strange. Our knowledge of Satan only developed over thousands of years. And the point is it underlines it's our responsibility to fight evil, not to blame Satan. Does that make sense? So you say, well, why didn't it just really mention Satan? Because maybe God didn't want us to blame Satan for all the evil that we chose to do. Does that make sense? So yes, the snake is Satan. But the point of the story is you're not supposed to blame others for the evil that you chose. And just to go over this, there's two creation stories. They actually match up, but there's two creation stories. But in each one, everything is good. Every time God makes something, he says, it is good. It is good. Now, the amazing part is when God makes the earthlings, us, humans, God does say that we are good. But the difference is, and I'm going to try to explain this, he uses a transitive verb. So a transitive verb is, anybody speak Spanish? I don't really speak Spanish, but okay. Okay, so in Spanish, there's two ways of saying it's hot. So caliente is hot. So if I said, there's one verb that means transitory, one means permanent. So if I use the transitive verb, estoy, I am hot, it means I'm just hot right now. The temperature's hot. Does that make sense? If I said soy caliente, that means I'm hot. Huge difference in meaning. Does that make sense? So God says it is good, it is good, it is good. And the is permanent. But then when God makes human beings, we are good, but he uses the transitive verb. So it can change. Does that make sense? So we are good, but we're these odd creatures that have free will. So Adam and Eve's fall describes the origin of evil. And then you know the story. But the real question is, what's the nature of temptation? The language we get of Eve is, quote, Eve, seeing that the fruit was good to eat. What that really means is this. God said everything is good, but don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and selfishness. When she says seeing it as good, it's a way of saying she's decided, or they, really it's they decided to come up with their own definition of what is moral. Does that make sense? So their morality is not based on what good God says is good. They want to come up with their own moral code, their own definition of good. So the original sin was not, in one sense, the original sin was to not believe in the goodness of creation. It was to believe that we have to come up with our own definition of morality. Eve is tempted to behave as God does, tempted to judge what is good for oneself, theological sovereignty from God. So as the serpent says, you will be like God, knowing good from evil. And now, do you want to know the difference between good and evil? Yes. But when it says know good from evil, it raises a question. What exactly is the temptation here? What exactly is a sin? Is it the experience of temptation or the sheer disobedience of the will of God? Or does it even start before even picking the fruit? Is it wanting to see differently than God has created? Is it wanting to see evil as good? This is an evil, but I'm going to call it good. Is it the temptation to judge like God, to be independent from God? When does the sin begin? The sin actually begins when you decide to, I will define what is good and what is evil. Does that make sense? So, yes. Good. That way I can work towards the food. So you have a question. Well, no, she didn't question. She redefined. There's no question there. What's that? Oh, yes, the snake. The snake convinces her. And the snake is called, and this is going to be really key, is the snake is called cunning. Because you want to look for that word all through the Old Testament. Every time somebody is called cunning, it means tricky. It's not evil in itself. And later, St. Paul will call Christ a cunning Messiah. That Christ is going to trick us into love. I know that sounds kind of strange. Christ is more cunning than the devil. He's going to win. So the snake is cunning. It tricks him. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, the beginning of the sin is listening to the wrong source. Right. And yeah, the beginning is listening, but also remember, Adam and Eve were supposed to guard the garden. They're supposed to stand up to the snake, not agree with it. So that's the maturity. And when he says you'll have knowledge of good and evil, the Hebrew word there is yada. And yada is not intellectual knowledge. Because I've heard atheists say, the snake was just offering us knowledge. But the word is yada, which is really more means an experience, an intimate knowledge. So, there's some knowledge that we don't want to experience. No offense. Do you really need to learn the definition of good and evil by being raped? You don't want that experience. Does that make sense? You don't want that cruelty. Such knowledge you don't want. You don't want to redefine evil as good. You don't want to define rape as a good thing. That's what it means. So evil is seen as a rebellion. The nature of evil in Genesis clearly is a form of rebellion against God, but against goodness itself, against freedom. There seems to be this rivalry with God, but at no point can humans ever truly rival God. God's power is never threatened by evil. So, unlike pagan myths, there's no battle. We can choose evil, but in no way does it endanger God. It just endangers our own heart. And so the real threat of evil, of giving into it, is to us and to creation. Evil and rebellion is this futile character that tries to fight God, but God is perfectly safe in the story. Evil divides. If you notice, once they eat the fruit, all you get is division. So the Garden of Eden, I mentioned this, is the place of shalom. Shalom should be translated more the idea of unity. Unity between human beings, unity between us and God, unity within ourselves, and unity with creation itself. The devil, the word devil means divider, wants to divide all that. Separate us from God, separate us from each other, separate us from creation, and even create us separated from our true selves. God constantly wants to unite in shalom. So that's the difference. And here's the thing. Evil is a human community sin. It's not Eve sinned. It's Adam and Eve both sinned. They were together when that was happening. So they both eat the fruit. And the point being is evil, this sounds kind of strange. God wants to create unity, but in this odd way, evil creates a certain type of unity. That's what the story of Tower of Babel is about. That people can be united sometimes not in goodness, but in creating evil. So it's not simply an individual act, it's compounded and deepened by a community. Like, this sounds kind of strange. Nazis were united. But here's the thing. Always in the Bible, evil always destroys itself. God doesn't have to destroy evil. Evil will destroy itself. And if we side with evil, it'll gain a short-term unity like Nazis, but they always destroy themselves. And so you have this idea that evil destroys itself. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of goodness with it as well. So you have the story of Cain and Abel. In Cain and Abel, the rebellion continues. But Cain kills Abel over liturgy, over worship. So just to explain the story, and this is going to be... So if you notice, they both offer a sacrifice. Just saying. How you worship God is not a rock and roll concert. It's a sacrifice. And Abel offers like a lamb, and Cain offers a cereal offering, bread. But why doesn't God accept Cain's offering? Because Abel offers the best. Cain keeps the best for himself, selfishly, and offers God the leftover. Now, God does not get mad with Cain, but actually encourages Cain to do better. But Cain, he'd rather not strive to do better. He just eliminates the competition and kills his brother. And Cain, if you read the story, Cain is the author of culture and the builder of cities. It's a way of saying that the human culture and civilized life, as wonderful as it is really something abnormal to our origins. Sometimes it's a way of covering up our own sins. And there's this important part that God says to Cain, and this is the main point of my lecture, is God says to Cain, sin is crouching at your door, but you can master it if you try. So what he urges Cain is a way of self-discipline to God's way. Now, this gets a little technical, and please raise your hand if I lose you. In the rabbinic tradition centers on evil, the evil impulse and the good impulse in the human heart. So in the Hebrew, there's two phrases you have to learn. The Yetzer Hara, and that's a selfish impulse, and the Yetzer HaTov. So Adam and Eve ate from the tree of Tov and Ra. Technically not evil, good and evil. That's a mistranslation. It's the tree of good and selfishness. And so the rabbis believe that God created two impulses, two different impulses in the human heart, Tov and Ra. So the Ra is the selfish impulse. The Tov is the good impulse. And the odd part is, the rabbi noticed, they're very textually driven. It's called human... they notice every word. And here's a really odd fact. In Genesis, when it says, God formed the earthling, the word formed is the word yetzer, but the verb yetzer, to form, to fashion, when he speaks to Cain, it's misspelled. And it has two yodas in it. And every occurrence that this happens in the Bible, it's spelled correctly, except this one place in the Cain story where it has two yods. So naturally, the rabbis notice that. And it's speaking about the two impulses. And the word yetzer, made, is misspelled. And they said, oh, that's proof that God has, that's just one more proof. There's two impulses. And so that they wrote, the Holy One created two impulses, one good, the other selfish. And it's explained in Deuteronomy, where it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. And the odd wording all also has a double consonant, which is misspelled. So what they're thinking is, oh, what that means is there's many parts to the human heart. It's not one thing, it's many. So when God created human beings, gave them two rival sources of energy. And life, in a way, is a contest between these two impulses. And these impulses were there at the beginning. And they're two different views. Now, this sounds kind of strange. The raw impulse, the selfish impulse, listen to this, is not evil. It's only evil if you misuse it. That's what Cain did. It's trying to control you. You must master it. Here, evil is to misuse the selfish impulse. And so this sounds kind of strange. The selfish impulse, like I'm very Jewish in this way, I see it. The selfish impulse is this. What is the selfish impulse? It's this passion for life. The raw impulse is a passion for goodness. The Tov impulse is a passion for life. And so, why did you get a job? Why did you build a house? Why did you start a family? That's the raw impulse, the selfish impulse. You want to make a difference in the world. Does that make sense? It's a good thing. So the Jews would say, if you don't have a raw impulse, there's something wrong with you, Patrick. If he just wants to sit around all day watching TV and playing video games, there's something, you're lacking a passion for life. Does that make sense? So the raw impulse is good. It's about protecting life and having a family. That's an impulse. And it makes you competitive. Competition is not an evil thing. The Jews would say, when you meet a child, and this always amazed me, even if the child is extrovert and you meet a little child and it hides behind your leg, they would say, oh, that's the raw impulse. You want to protect life, and they want to protect their life. Does that make sense? It's not evil. The problem is that sense of, I want to produce and gain ahead. Cain, what God says, no, don't let, it is crouching. It wants to master you. You must master it. Does that make sense? So let's take the raw impulse. It means I'm going to cheat. I'm going to kill my competition. I will get the house by poisoning its owner. Does that make any sense? So don't think raw is evil. It's not. But you must learn how to master it. Does that make any sense? So where does evil come in this story? By refusing to master the raw impulse. You also have a good impulse, the tov impulse. That's something like a conscience. And this sounds kind of strange. Jews believe at the age 12 or 13, you begin to struggle with tov versus ra. Actually, Catholics believe it happens around age 8. That's why you go to confession around age 8, make your first communion. Now, actually, do you know which age a human being lies the most? Not 3 or 4, No, they do lie, but what age do human beings lie the most? 13. So every time I meet a 13-year-old, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, you little liar. Because they now have they're now intelligent enough to know how to tell a lie and get away with it, but they haven't suffered the consequences of lying. Does that make sense? So they need to. So the raw impulse, I like that. The raw impulse is not demonic. We'd say it's natural and a gift from God. We'd say it becomes demonic when you misuse it. So it's a good thing. Anyhow, so God says to Cain, you have to learn how to master the Yetzer Hara, or it will master you. Now, think about this. Think what this means. There's no over-dramatization of evil in this story. And I like this point. Evil in this sense is really very mundane. It comes down to you making your choices. That's why the story, the Ra is not satanic. Satan is not the problem in the Genesis story. It's human beings who we refuse to master our selfish impulse. So it's not this metaphysical, dark being of evil in the world. Maybe it's as mundane as God saying, you must learn to master it. It is crouched at your door, seeking to master you. Every day, you must struggle to master it. So in Judaism, the daily mastering of the selfish impulse is in all these tiny little acts and tiny little choices. You're not trying to cut it out. That would be impossible. That's part of our makeup. In the Jewish idea, you're trying to master it. So the reason why Jews have so many tiny little rules and regulations is you're trying to master the selfish impulse. You know what we call this in Catholicism? Mortification of the flesh, which I know you don't ever hear that anymore. But it's learning to control the selfish impulse. I mean, the reason why we did all that Lenten stuff of fasting and not enjoying chocolate is we don't want to be controlled by our selfish impulse. It's not that chocolate is bad. It's not like what good does fasting do? You know, really, what good does it do? It helps us control our selfish impulse. But if you're not careful, you think religion is about little tiny rules and regulations, or as Christ said, weighing dill and mint. It's not about the little tiny rules and regulations. It's about mastering awe, the power, that raw impulse, so that we can completely be free. So do you see what I mean when I say, in this story, evil is very mundane. It comes down to tiny little daily choices. Does that make sense? So I love that. Evil is not supernatural in this story. Now, my problem is I think a lot of fundamentalist Christians give the devil too much power in the world. Now, by the way, the next class will actually be on Satan, which is important. But this sounds kind of strange. Ours is more of a Jewish idea. I'm not trying to fight Satan. I'm trying to control my own selfish impulses. The more if you notice in history, the Calvinistic religions, Southern Baptists, they tend to blame Satan for everything. And notice they don't have a lot of mortification of the flesh. It's not anything as mundane as controlling my heart. It's about controlling the devil. And I hate to say this, our view doesn't trivialize evil, but it makes us accountable. So the first stories in the Bible is not about how we need to fight the devil. The first stories in the Bible is how we have to master our own impulse. Or when it comes to that impulse, the Talmud puts it this way, I like it. At first, the selfish impulse is called a wayfarer. Then it's called a guest. And finally, it is called master. Isn't that a great, you let your selfishness control you rather than you control it. So the fight against evil is measured out in daily little choices. No offense, if you're standing outside your neighbor's house armed with a gun, it's a little too late. Selfishness has become your master. Or, God forbid, this was shocking. Just 2 blocks away from my former parish at Holy Apostles, there's this 4-way stop. There's a 4-way stop, and I guess this young kid got upset with somebody pausing too much at the stop sign. So he got out and he shot the driver. Just 2 blocks away from the church because they didn't go fast enough for him. So here's the question. When did the sin begin? That sin began years ago when this kid, I feel sorry for him. And I don't like it when you say, well, you just dismiss him and say, well, he was crazy. When did the craziness start? The craziness did not start at that stop sign. Years before, he kept giving in to his anger. Does that make sense? Until, it's a little too late at that point. That's evil in the world when we don't take control of it. And they did these interesting psychological studies that you become what you think and pray. So you have to be careful what you listen to. Evil is something that we meet in our own hearts on a daily basis. And when you're driving down the road and choose to cut somebody off, you're just giving in a little bit more to the selfish impulse. And so in the Jewish concept, evil should be faced on a daily basis. That's why I love the St. Ignatius practice of the examen. There's 5 steps. You guys know that, right? 5 steps. But I love step number 2, where I do a little bit more. I try and think of 6 things I'm sorry I did that day. I don't want my raw impulse to take over. Does that mean, believe I never have, even if nobody knows, going through Costco, I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, why'd you put your cart there? And it's not, the problem is, I'm right. Why did you put can you not see how you're blocking everybody? I'm right. But I'm giving in to the raw impulse. Does that make sense? And so, I really, really think the examen is a great thing of, I will not let this stuff control me. So the notion, this sounds kind of strange. I also really hate in movies where you lose your free will. A magical spell was put upon you and I couldn't help it. Or, I hate any movies or TV shows that take away your free will. That's very un-Catholic, un-Jewish. You always have free will. You chose it. And yet they always want to blame somebody else. And I want to give a lecture on this someday, that I'm a victim. You're not a victim. Control your raw impulse. This sounds kind of strange. The notion that I'm in this vast cosmic war with evil, the rabbis would say, no, you're just trying to grow up. That's just it. And next week, I'm going to talk about how we are in a big cosmic war with evil. But this week, as I said, it's not one singular solution. Does that make sense? But evil may be as mundane as having to face up to the warping of our own heart. Does that make sense? I love the fact that the Bible starts with that. So we don't over-dramatize evil because it takes away our emotional responsibility. I hate to say this, I think that's what the fundamentalists do. And in the Bhagavad Gita, which is an Eastern text, they encourage this thing called Swaraj. Raj means to rule. Swa is self-rule. That spirituality is about self-rule, learning to control your own impulses. So when I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is just like Genesis, what God said to Cain. And Cain's evil reply is, am I my brother's keeper? That's really a poetic, great poetry there. Now, am I my brother's keeper? Technically, it's a reverse of the word Yahweh. Yahweh means I am. So it's flipping it around. And it doesn't say brother's keeper. It means, the word really is shepherd. Yeah, you are. If God is about unity, then whatever happens to you happens to me. Whatever happens to you affects the heart of God. So God says, I heard your brother's blood cry out. And the Hebrew word there is sa'ak, one of my favorite Hebrew words. So over and over, God will say, to conquer evil, you have to learn how to hear sa'ak. It's a cry of pain. It's a cry of injustice. It's a cry of suffering. Cain cannot hear sa'ak. He can't hear his own brother's suffering. Does that make any... So, to conquer evil, yes, we have to learn sa'ak. We have to have our hearts broken, where if somebody else is in pain, we're in pain. But Cain's reply is, I am not my brother's keeper. Yeah, you are. Now, you know the weakness of this theology? Okay, let me stop. Do you understand this theological point that's being made in the Bible? Okay. I love it. What's its weakness? Well, one of its weaknesses is the Shoah, or as we would call it, the Holocaust in World War II. Think about this. It creates this problem if you're Jewish, that since the Holocaust, there was this thing called the Shoah, the catastrophe. Is this picture of evil too mundane and too ordinary to handle the Shoah? Ironically, the Shoah was not this vast, in this sense, millions of Catholics, but millions of Jews died in the Holocaust. And evil for the rabbis is about greed and jealousy and envy. But maybe that picture seemed a little too small to millions of people being industrialized murder. Does that make sense? It's not just small daily acts. The Holocaust occurred and millions died. Does that make sense? But I guess my retort to that would be the story of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel exemplifies what happens if all our small choices becomes organized. That all our small choices to greater selfishness becomes explicitly political, organized. That's what the Tower of Babel is. And so think about this. When they build the Tower of Babel, at no point do they say, we want to rebel against God. What they said is, we want to make a name for ourselves. They don't want the name human. They don't want the name of God. They want to come up with their, once again, like Eve, their own definition of morality. But they're not working against God. But now they become industrialized, and they're using the greatest technology at that time period, a brick, to reorganize society. But you reorganize it without God, and it creates this great evil. Does that make any sense? So the Tower of Babel is, wow, what if this Yetzer Hara becomes organized in a political machinery where selfishness is now organized, and we call it technological advancement? Does that make any sense? Then you get things like the Holocaust. Questions, objections? Yes. I hate that, but that's okay. She's, just for those who are online, she's asking, this time, we're facing this analogy that everything is the oppressed and the oppressor. Because you can hear Sa'ak. So, such a great statement. Like, so, for those online, yeah, her heart breaks when she sees a child suffering in a movie. She can't watch it. Or when people make fun of bald people. I thought that was what she said. So, little things like that you're aware of. But when it becomes part of the fabric of a political system, you can't quite, or a church, you can't quite see it. So, 1 week a year, Catholics pray on this. Do you know what that week is? The second scrutiny during Lent. During the second scrutiny, we pray to see social sins, which are really hard. You're right. They're really hard to see when they're part of the fabric of what we do. But you can see them. They just take effort. So I hate to say this. Go back to my example of the annulments. Why can't Vatican bureaucrats see that, wow, that's a painful process that you've made? I'm not against annulments. I'm against it being painful. But they can't see it. They can't hear the Sa'ak. Because, well, no, I'm just following the rules. You made those rules. It's like Jesus said to the Pharisees. You invent heavy rules to put on the backs of other people, and then you don't lift a finger to help. You're not welcoming people into the kingdom of God. You're becoming a stumbling block. So, you have to want to see it. Does that make any sense? So, it amazes me. Unlike other Christian denominations, once a year we pray, wow, how will we become the Babel? How will we become organized? And you can say, well, it's not my fault. I don't do annulments. But you're part of the church. We should all open our eyes how politically, governmentally, church-wise, we've become organized and the raw impulse. Because it's not in your heart. It's in the system. Does that make sense? So this sounds kind of strange. When it says Jesus came to save us from our sins, unfortunately, everybody always interprets that as your personal sin, the way you yelled at your mother or the way you cuss. We all know it. But when it says sins in the Hebrew context, it also means the systems. Jesus came to save us from our systems. Sometimes, like the Tower of Babel, evil, Nazism becomes systematized. And you don't see it because it's just part of the fabric that we live in. Does that make sense? So yeah, it takes effort. You must learn how to master it or it will master you. So, great example. Yeah. Oh, no, I agree with you. We're not in this opening our eyes to see evil, we are not alone. We have God on our side, and we have each other. We push each other. It's a community that creates evil, but also it's a community that allows us to open our eyes. So, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. That's why I like the rabbi statement that, oh, first it's a wayfarer, it's passing through. Then it's a guest, and then it becomes your master. You only see what you want to see. And so that's why I love, and I know we just finished Lent, but wow, to really Easter celebrates freedom. Right? Easter Passover is this feast of freedom. But no offense, how can you celebrate freedom if you didn't do any mortification during Lent? You're no freer than you were if you didn't even try during Lent. Are you any more free in Easter time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's going to be next week. That's going to be next week. Oh, I don't know without Satan. I know we actualized evil. Satan is no threat to us. We chose the evil. So I love the fact that it starts off there, not with a story of Satan won't come about in the Bible for hundreds of years. Not that it's not true, but I think it's too easy to dismiss all evil saying, oh, well, that's Satan. I will really enjoy that lecture, but let's start with, no. In here, you fundamentally make a choice to either let the selfish impulse control you or you control it. It's not evil. You should build houses and care for your family and da-da-da-da-da. But if you're, like you said, it starts to take over and you redefine what is goodness, that I need more of this than that person. So. He likes Gandalf because he wants a big beard. Do you know what he's talking about, or do you want me to explain it? The ring of power, they're all susceptible, and they all would say, but I would use the ring for goodness, but it corrupts you. And only an incredibly humble, simple person can bear the ring, and even then, it costs. So you seek the way of greater and greater humility to protect yourself. That's great. All right, so next week we're going to cover Satan. So exciting. Wait, Paula. Yeah, you know what though? This sounds kind of strange. I know one woman who hates the idea of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, but I find it very child developmental. but we're always a child. And yeah, I do find it very, like, okay, now there's going to come a time, and if you're a parent, like I think it's a real, this is my opinion, but if you're a parent, I think a real evil is to be a snowplower parent. Snowplower parent? Where, you know, like, oh, we just don't want you to have any problems. You're great just the way you are. No, you're supposed to challenge you're letting your selfishness master you. Does that make sense? And you must master it. So, and you fight you fight evil as a community. We want everything smoothed out for them. No, you want to make them No, you don't. As I said, you don't want your children safe. You want them strong. So, all right. Does that make sense? Why I like studying evil? Because it's a backwards way of studying goodness. So, all right. So, thank you for the coffee and everything. So, glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. All right. So, the opposite of evil is freedom.